Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 22nd of June in the 25th week of 2012. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion on the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and Ron Szoke. We'll take turns suggesting overlooked or misreported items from the week's news, and then answering questions and comments from the other two. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the 20 years we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Today is Friday, June 22nd, in the week of the summer solstice of 2012. The solstice arrived at 6:09 p.m. Central Daylight Time last Wednesday evening. That's the moment when the sun reaches its highest position in the sky, as seen from the North Pole. Though the summer solstice is an instant in time, the term is also used like the term midsummer to refer to the day on which it occurs. Except in the polar regions, when daylight is continuous for many months, the day on which the summer solstice occurs is the day of the year with the longest period of daylight. It's also celebrated as St. John's Eve, with reference to the feast on June 24th of the birth of John the Baptist. Perhaps more accurately, John the Baptizer, and I'm told in one of the new colloquial translations of the New Testament, Jack the Dipper. In any case, the Eve of St. John, the summer solstice, midsummer, is a celebration in many traditions. Edward de Vere used it in the title of his play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And that raises the point that we've made here before as transcendental rule number 6 of News from Neptune: the poets often get there first. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but sometimes that vision is carried out by very peculiar people indeed. As the bard says in A Midsummer Night's Dream, lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies, that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell could hold, that is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in the brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. This is News from Neptune, the Bottom's Dream edition. And we'll begin with Ron Szoke. You have a dream this week, Ron?
I have a dream. Oh, no. Wrong speech. Sorry. Let's see. A couple of things to be disposed of. This is the week, the 100th anniversary of the birth of Alan Turing, the great computer mathematical genius who had an unfortunate life because he was a homosexual at the time when that was very much illegal and punished severely in England, unfortunately. And this week, next week actually, is the 300th anniversary of the birth of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social philosopher. And I may come back to that. But the real point here is to comment on the healthcare decision and debate that's coming up. Expected daily from the Supreme Court, will they rule the Health Care Act constitutional or unconstitutional, or parts of it unconstitutional, or whatever. Interesting article by one Philip Caper in the Bangor Daily News of Maine. Poorer nations push for universal health coverage as U.S. squabbles. So he notes that a few weeks ago, an article by Noam Levny of Los Angeles Times caught my eye. It was titled, "Global Push to Guarantee Health Coverage Leaves U.S. Behind." And it described how even as Americans debate whether to scrap President Obama's health care law and its promise of guaranteed health coverage, many far less affluent nations are moving in the opposite direction to provide medical insurance to all citizens. Among those other countries are China, Thailand, Mexico, Rwanda, and Ghana. The article went on to explain that 2 decades ago, many former communist countries in Eastern Europe and elsewhere dismantled their universal health care systems amid a drive to set up a free market economy. But popular demand for insurance protection has fueled an effort to, in nearly all of these countries, to rebuild their systems. Similar pressure is coming from the citizens of fast-growing nations in Asia and Latin America, where rising living standards have raised expectations of better service. And by the way, this is a thoroughly American idea. If you look at the works, especially the later works of the American philosopher Josiah Royce, you'll find a extended treatment of what insurance can do, social insurance, and the degree to which people as citizens need and deserve that kind of protection and financial security. So I refer you to Royce if you think this is some bad foreign communist idea or whatever.
It's a good foreign communist idea.
Yeah, right. Next, I'll refer to an article by Paul Krugman of actually at the end of March called "Broccoli and Bad Faith." Nobody knows what the Supreme Court will decide with regard to the Affordable Care Act, but after this week's hearings, it seems quite possible the court will strike down the mandate, the requirement that individuals purchase health insurance, and maybe the whole law. He says, let's start with the already famous exchange in which Justice Antonin Scalia compared the purchase of health insurance with the purchase of broccoli, with the implication that the government can compel you, if it can compel you to do the former, it can also compel you to do the latter. That comparison horrified healthcare experts all across America because health insurance is nothing like broccoli.
Come on.
Right, Paul, right. Yeah. So
Broccoli is good for you.
Yeah, I call this theme the attack of the killer broccoli, right? So what do we do about this? Try to clear up the notion that there is some analogy or some comparison between the two. Indeed, this says conservatives used to like the idea of required purchases as an alternative to taxes, which is why the idea for the mandate originally came not from liberals, but from the ultra-conservative Heritage Foundation. By the way, another pet conservative project, private accounts to replace Social Security, relies on, yes, mandatory contributions from individuals. So it's curious that this will be judged possibly unconstitutional, whereas if we just levied taxes to pay for the whole thing, that's clearly constitutional and would not be objectionable on that ground. Anyway, so is the broccoli comparison going to be fatal to some people? I'm afraid so. Going on to higher and vaguer matters.
Well, we want to stay with healthcare for a minute. It seems to me there's a lot of things.
I want to get on to the dark money controversy if we have time for it, and the fact that more families have no savings. Yeah. And the like, but I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, you want to take a stalk on the broccoli at the broccoli question?
Well, I guess the question becomes what I'm, sort of leads in what I'm going to mention later. Is that do we root for Obama, or in this case Obamacare, or do we root, quote unquote, root, against, it's kind of like deciding, being a Lakers fan or a Bulls fan and deciding whether to root for the Heat or the Thunder.
Interesting comparison.
I mean, I don't know. It's like that.
I root for broccoli.
Yeah. But like with so much about what Obama has wrought, we are asked to accept half a loaf or less than half a loaf as opposed to getting what we would actually want, and all of the, we're asked to compartmentalize our sort of our politics, and I guess that's the word that I would sort of that I would apply to not only this but what I'm going to refer to later in more general terms.
That's the Auden poem about don't live on plain water, bread and greens. I mean, this is half a loaf and broccoli. Gentlemen, you're making me hungry for supper. Yeah, right.
I'm having a Monty Python moment here. Do we vote for the silly party or the sensible party? Well, you choose which is which.
Well, look, it seems to me that the best thing that could happen with the court this week is for the court to strike this down, this mandate, not because the law makes a great deal of sense, broccoli or no, but because if this mandate is struck down, the same sort of demands that you were talking about, Ron, from in other countries, in this country, will become the basis for a campaign for Medicare for all, which is what the Obama administration should have done in the first place. I mean, instead, they put together this quite cynical deal. I mean, we're beginning to recognize a sort of Obama style here, in faking left, driving right, in a way that either Wade or LeBron would be very happy to be able to do. That he's said that he's providing health care and so forth, but in fact, the Obamacare has as its principal beneficiaries, by far, the insurance companies and the Wall Street establishment behind health care. Écrasez la femme, strike the thing down, get rid of it, and let's have a serious demand for universal health care, single-payer health care.
Must things get worse before they can get better?
Well, sometimes, yeah. I mean, that's probably true. If you think striking down Obamacare is getting things worse, then that has to happen.
At least in the short run, I think it obviously will be true.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's a good reason for striking down Obamacare because, as you pointed out, Obamacare does have some real beneficiaries. They had to do that. There had to be a sop in Obamacare to the people who were out calling for national health care, about which the United States is remarkably retrograde. I mean, these things have been proposed as part of American law ever since the Second World War, when the rest of the world, the rest of the industrialized world, made these changes. End of the Second World War, the British turfed out the nasty old warmonger who had been in charge of the country during the war, and voted in the Left Party, which precisely to do those sorts of social reforms that included universal health care. The British have had it ever since. Now, I mean, in spite of the attempts, the major attempts by British big business to stop it. All right, the story in this country is a long and winding road, but maybe the result will be finally to draw straight with crooked lines and let the conservatives strike down the mandate and let us move towards universal health care as we should have long ago. I hope so.
Well, anyway, by publishing an article this morning on that extra money that Carl just referred to, the $100 billion or so that has gone to other aspects of this Affordable Health Care Act, the New York Times clearly, the effect of that article would be for someone to say, well, no, this would be horrible if this were struck down. They focus on a health clinic in a place called Peekskill, which I happened to have visited at one point in my life, and it's a pretty hurting place. And this health clinic serves a lot of pretty hurting people. So it's clear that the intent of that article, I mean, not that the New York Times feels like it has any influence over Supreme Court justices per se, but certainly the intent of this article among the liberal readers of the New York Times would be to be quite concerned over the possible overturning of the ACA.
Well, this is the Democratic strategy and it has been for a long time. A little bit for the people who need it, and a lot for the people who don't.
Yeah.
And that's that's the Obama administration has refined that. It seems to me in the healthcare area.
So yeah, we have this big what's called reverse Robin Hood movement going on, transferring wealth from the poor and the middle class to the rich. It's especially obvious, as has been pointed out again and again, in the so-called Ryan budget, and tax relief for the richest, and what will amount to increases for the poorest. And it's an utter shame and scandal, but people, I'm not sure they're waking up to this.
But when we condemn the Ryan budget, we shouldn't be blind to the fact that all it does is what has been done by both parties for 30 years.
Yeah.
The accelerating transfer of wealth from the majority to the 1%. This is the general name for that is neoliberalism. It's not an accident. It's a conscious policy to reverse a generation of the growth of social supports that occurred even in this country, not just in countries that had been devastated by the Second World War. There's a big turnaround there, and it's neoliberalism that's that's the name of the game. More about this next week when we actually get a decision from the Supreme Court on the matter, eh? We'll look at the broccoli leftovers. David, you want to go on to a second point?
Well, I don't know. Did you?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. I guess I can sort of continue with the theme of compartmentalization.
I thought you wanted to talk about you and Paul Krugman are talking about prisons this week.
Yeah, well, that too. Actually, it was good that Paul Krugman wrote a good column this morning exposing the privatization of prisons, and that sort of deals with relates to at a very small local level this idea that there's a group that's opposed to the building of the Champaign County spending $20 million, actually not spending, borrowing and spending $20 million of money to build a new county jail, and I'm hoping that this campaign will, as I said in my letter the other day, I hope that this campaign will at least get people to think about what the options are and what jails and prisons actually do, and a much. The context that this takes place is at a much larger scale of the war on drugs and the new Jim Crow and all that stuff that we've referred to on recent programs, and really is a major issue. I wanted to raise the issue of I picked up the local newspaper this morning. I actually don't pick it up. I actually read it online. But at least, maintain that sort of fiction that we pick up the newspaper.
I'm a traditionalist, yeah.
I
do
pick up anymore. Right. But in reading a column by Charles Krauthammer, I was shocked to find out I actually agreed with a lot of what he said, or some of what he said, and I asked myself, why am I agreeing with Charles Krauthammer?
You have to go lie down for a while.
And certainly not the tone of the article or the general perspective from which the article is written, but of course, the reason that I agree with this article is because that I don't trust the politics behind why Obama does certain things. And in this case, it's the DREAM Act. In other cases, it may have been striking down Don't Ask, Don't Tell for gays in the military, or another might have been gay marriage, or any of the variety of what might be called sort of, I think it's trivializing them to call them identity politics issues because they're real rights issues. Mm-hmm. Except I can't help but think that, and especially true in case of those immigrant young people who would like to have their futures in this country secured, sort of legally secured in a way that they could get on with their life without wondering what's going to become of them as non-citizens of this country. But still, I don't trust Obama's motives for doing that, And I suspect that and I know we'll get into the issue of motives versus actions.
Why? Who would raise that?
but the actions involved are actions that have to do with the current presidential campaign, and they might be seen as actions of a different kind in that context. And also they might be seen, since we're always talking about opportunity costs in terms of actions that are taken in lieu of other actions that might be taken, we might talk about these actions in terms of what might be done in a broader sense, whether it's in terms of immigration policy broadly speaking, or economic policy broadly speaking, or healthcare policy broadly speaking, that we're always called upon again to compartmentalize our politics and sort of see it as forgive the expression. I don't know if it's correct politically anymore, but a Chinese menu, or perhaps an Asian menu or perhaps a Jewish Arabic menu of whatever, of picking and choosing, and then sort of being happy that anything is on the menu at all. So the question I raise is, as we deal with these issues on a case-by-case basis, as we deal with the idea of having a political movement, as we deal with the idea of our two-party system, as we deal with the idea of the relative meaninglessness of electoral politics, how we view these little crumbs that are sort of thrown to the liberal left portion of the American people.
That's a falafel comparison, David. Really terrible.
Yeah.
Comments, Ron?
Well, again, classic dilemma here. Do we dismiss the better because it's not the good? And I'm usually willing to go along with half a loaf for now, with the notification that I'll be back for the other half next week. And so this argument has gone on endlessly in the history of politics. I don't think that I will be able to settle it here, except I judge individual cases, and it's hard to say which way I will go on any particular controversy. But yeah, I very much believe in dealing with the real world as it is, and improving it, even if that doesn't bring about paradise or whatever. So I don't really believe in dismissing improvements because they're not going to lead to perfection.
I think sometimes there's almost a temperamental difference here between, I mean, characterological almost, between reformers and revolutionaries. Revolutionaries look at situations which really are anti-human and destructive and so forth, and say this has to change. We've got to change it to something that does include the human values. Reformers say, yeah, but we might be able to make things just a little better, you know, and maybe a few people would stop suffering along the way. I think the problem is to see that as a necessary alternative. It isn't. I mean, it's the issues become issues of tactics almost. What's going to work here? And when we see examples of governments giving bits of sops of reform precisely to forestall a more general solution of the problem, then we're properly skeptical, I think.
Yes.
But and the examples that we've given today, I think, may fall into that area.
Yeah, the classic problem of what are called palliatives. So you can stave off any major change by making a whole lot of minor adjustments that don't really change the situation in any fundamental way. And classic tactic, something that the classical kinds of conservatives the Tories have always contemplated. Things must change in order that they can be the same. It's a problem.
I've got a take on this on these immigration issues and so forth that this dream matter is supposed to speak to in some ways. You know, it seems to me that what we need here, in fact, are revolutionary solutions, open borders. The whole notion of trying to decide who gets across the border and who doesn't get across the border has just got to stop. And I'm not talking about certain local situations where this is certainly necessary, such as the Middle East. I'm also talking about the United States. And when we talk about the notion of open borders, which is not even on the radar for American political discussion.
Yeah, try to sell that to the American populace.
Well, that's but that's why, you know, a revolutionary solution is what's necessary, and palliatives, including the ones we were just discussing, are not going to be adequate. Look, part of the problem is that we make an assumption about how things always were, about borders, for example, and then we just try to decide, okay, how do we handle the security across borders? How many people do we let in? Do we let in more or less? Most people are quite shocked to find that passports, in the sense that you use them when you go on vacation to Europe, didn't exist before the First World War. Passports really only grew up in the last Great Depression. Before the First World War, it was we had essentially open borders in the United States, and so did most other countries. In fact, what happened in the U.S. in the late 19th century is that as a complete innovation, as something new and unheard of, there were moves to try to limit Chinese immigration into the United States. Asians were arriving, particularly in the west coast of America, to look for work. And it has to do with the long-standing economic connection between the U.S. and China, which goes back well before the First World War. It's not just an artifact of the post-Second World War world. Now look, if we think seriously about what happened in the way that a lot of our fellow citizens' families got here through Ellis Island and so forth, we realized that what was going on there was an innovation, a new attempt to make some sort of control over what before was open immigration. And that made sense because the expansion of the United States in the 19th century depended upon the notion that labor was mobile, that you could bring in workers from Ireland or from Poland or from Italy and so forth, that they would come to America and they could work in the American burgeoning capitalism of the 19th century. The essential characteristic here, and the thing that differentiates that world from the capitalist world we know, was that capital was immobile in the 19th century. Capital, which means not just money in the bank, but what you need in order to produce things, factories, fields, farm, what have you. Capital is immobile. The farm sits there. You can't pick up the farm and send it to China. The Chinese workers can come here and work on that farm, but the factory, everything else, is immobile. Now, the transition in the 20th century was that capital became mobile via finance. That is, you sell your farm in Iowa and buy one in the Ukraine, something like that. Capital becomes mobile via finance, and therefore, correspondingly, labor has to become stable. Labor becomes limited. Labor can't move around after the cap. You're moving that farm. You're moving that factory in order to take advantage of the labor when you get there. Yeah. We've seen that particularly in this country in the last generation. But that's a change. This is new, and that's the reason we don't now have open borders. Okay, if we're going to change the capital structure of the world, we have to change the labor structure as well, and conversely.
My preferred conclusion would be a state in which anyone can move anywhere in the world that they want to and visit there, live there, whatever they want to do. But yeah, we've reached the state now where billions of dollars can be moved from one side of the globe to the other with a touch of a computer key. And that's a very different world.
You can't go from Laredo to El Paso in order to get a job. Yeah.
So, I mean, what are when you take the step of getting rid of borders, what are the economic and sort of social welfare implications of having a policy? Just to play along with this idea, the idea, it seems to me, that would would be that at that point, if the relative prosperity of our country in relation to, say, Mexico remained the same, a lot of Mexicans would be moving here, or maybe more than already are, and that would give us the incentive to have an economy in Mexico that wasn't in the same relationship.
I understand that net immigration from Mexico is recently zero.
Right.
So many of them are
Right.
finding difficulties here that they're going back to Mexico,
Right.
where they can have a better life.
But let's go back and figure out how it became the case that why it's shocking that it's back to zero now.
Yeah.
It's shocking it's back to zero now because it was so strongly in the other direction for so long. And what started that, or what gave it at least its major acceleration for the current generation, was the Clinton administration's NAFTA
Right.
agreement. It's important to remember that when Clinton signed, and the Clinton administration promoted vigorously the North American Free Trade Association, they did one other thing with it. They militarized the southern border. And so with one hand they were saying, let's free trade, and the other hand, bring the army to the border to keep people moving across it. Why was that necessary? It was necessary because it wasn't a free trade pact at all. It was freedom for corporations to exploit foreign labor, to send American capital, American jobs, American factories, and so forth abroad. Now, this was a conscious policy. This wasn't something that sort of just happened because the free market worked in some way. Not at all. It was the American government promoting the interests of the 1% of American corporations to the disadvantage, the substantial disadvantage of the rest of the world, and particularly of Central to South America. Agriculture was a special case in this. It was particularly agriculture that the policy was, agribusiness rather, American agribusiness, the policy was in support of. We've done it to ourselves, and if we've done it to ourselves, we can undo it. But the essential point is that people not understand what's going on. Hey, it was free trade. Yeah. Who's against free trade?
Right.
We want free trade, don't we?
Right.
Well, what actually happened was you gave these corporations all these great advantages. Yes, well, but it was free trade. So the important thing is to cover sin with smooth names, as American politicians learn their principal job is.
Yeah, the picture, simplified of course, as I understand it, was that Mexico was dominantly a nation of poor subsistence farmers who just had a patch of corn and a patch of beans, and they lived on that. There were no cash crops. But bringing things in free of duty from the USA meant that the big growers of corn in this country could undersell anything that was available in Mexico. And it drove all of those poor Mexican farmers off the land and gave them the idea that they should migrate to North America.
And we remember, as this week's signing of a new agriculture bill in this country pointed out, not much reported in this country, but still in all it did, that American agribusiness depended on what are essentially vast subsidies from the American government, so that your Mexican with his 1 acre and so forth is at a severe disadvantage when he is confronting international, American-based, American government-supported agribusiness. Let's see, where are we? Whose deal is it? I think it's mine. Hey, okay. All right, I'll try this one. We were talking about these. See what you gentlemen make of this. There's a demonstration going on, even I think as we record this program. There's a demonstration going on in favor of a constitutional amendment which would declare that corporations are not persons. And this is being billed as a proper response political response these days to the sorts of things that Occupy Wall Street and so forth are talking about, and specifically to the Supreme Court decision in what's called the Citizens United case, which said that corporations are able to contribute to political campaigns and support for political projects the same way an individual can. Now, I suggest two things to you. One, this campaign, MoveOn.org sponsors it, for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United is a waste of time, worse than a waste of time. It is in fact a distraction, indeed I think a conscious distraction, part of the attempt of this administration to co-opt the sorts of objections that have surfaced through Occupy Wall Street and similar groups, and this is a remarkable red herring, or to change the metaphor, a terrible dead end, and should be regarded as such. Second point, second thesis.
But first, how do you really feel about it?
Well, I just didn't want to leave any ambiguity.
Okay.
Oh, well, so I'll press on about why there is no amendment. Citizens United was properly decided.
I'm sorry. Did you have?
That's
know,
point two.
Yeah. That's it. That's point two.
Point one. Point
that
one
Citizens
is that
United
the constitutional amendment,
Yeah.
is at best a waste of time, at worst a malign attempt to turn aside real political movements in this country. And second, point two is Citizens United was correctly decided.
Well, it isn't. I'm not.
They're obviously bound up.
I'm lacking enthusiasm for anything that focuses on electoral politics at this point, and the whole debate over the use of money and speech in the context of political campaigns isn't anything that really gets me all excited. I know there's big amounts of money going on, and again, I mean, I'm sorry to sound like I'm sort of repeating the same thing, but I don't.
So are they.
I don't get all of the focus on sort of procedural issues that clearly, I have to say, tend to bring us back to the sort of democratic Republican way of understanding the world. You're one or the other, and there aren't any other options. And so it's the electoral system, the funding system, and I mean, what does it even exist for? It's a way of funding media. It's a way of funding media with incredible amounts of cash, and tying politicians to their campaign donors. It's a way of sort of insulating. It's one more way of insulating not just politics from policy, but sort of politics from politics,
right?
Because it's all really about money.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm backing in here to making a little bit of a case against Citizens United, or in favor of more openly funded political campaigns. But still, it isn't. I mean, I agree with the general tone of the point that we're not going to get very far simply opposing this campaign funding system, and beyond that, I share the basic mistrust of whatever MoveOn.org is up to, or is it called? Is it .org or .com or?
I think it's .org.
Yeah. Well, we used to have a problem of dark matter and then dark energy, and now we have a problem of dark money, as it's being called. And you don't think anything should be done about that. There should be unlimited donations from unnamed donors entering being injected into our political system.
Maybe you should be a little more specific about the dark money notion. It's not, I think, quite so common. I suggest that it's part of the misrepresentation of what's going on. The term itself has been introduced for those purposes, but there are others who think it may be a more neutral term. Perhaps you could define it in a neutral fashion.
Oh, well, where the amount and the source can be kept secret. And it normally is. And so there are
the amount and source of a political contribution.
Yes,
Yeah.
Millions and billions of dollars entering the political system via this route, and they're completely unaccountable. No one knows where they're coming from in these super PACs. And the whole thing has become so absurd. These organizations supposedly have no contact with the campaigns, but that's so obviously false and silly that it shouldn't be necessary to say much about it.
Well, look, I mean, there's a problem here that comes up when you hear the folks who want to overturn Citizens United with a constitutional amendment piously exclaim, money isn't speech, as an explanation of why it should not be allowed for corporations to contribute to political campaigns, why dark money of the sort that you describe, Ron, has to be done away with. Obviously, you would think that the easiest way to do that would simply be to turn on the light. Dark money is suddenly illuminated. Who is contributing is published and has to be published. But I don't know. That seems...
Bring in the sunlight, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Well, I think there may be something to that. That seems to me interim and reformist in a way. I'd like to take a step further back and say this question of money in politics depends upon a point that I think David alluded to a moment ago. Where does the money go, as we keep saying to ourselves? But in politics, where does the money go? The answer is immediately to the media. I actually was involved in a little campaign for Congress here in what was then the 15th Congressional District of Illinois 10 years ago. And although I knew this would be the case before we started, I was still amazed to find that in this local contest, where we actually spent more money than the Democrats did to run a campaign for the Greens that challenged an incumbent Republican in a gerrymandered Republican district. What we were spending our money on overwhelmingly was one thing. We were spending it on advertising on television and radio, electronic advertising. So all this dark money, all these campaign contributions, all this Citizens United cash ends up going straight into the pot in the pockets of the major corporations who run the media to buy airtime. That's what we're doing. Okay. What's the obvious short circuit for this problem? Free airtime. When you have an election going on, you simply insist that the media, on a basis to be established equivalently among candidates, provide that airtime, and the use of that dark money suddenly lessens in importance. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, that should be, I agree, a part of the condition under which these stations are awarded part of the spectrum. I mean, it should be their understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The airways belong to the people, we
Exactly,
say.
right.
And so why not? Now, we rarely hear this suggested. And one of the problems is it flies in the face of the progressive bromide that money isn't speech. Free speech doesn't mean free money. Well, of course, money is speech under this arrangement. And unless you realize the airways belong to the people and make them free to candidates, then...
Well, to me, money is still not speech, whether that's said piously or hysterically or whatever. But
But
money can buy you a whole lot of opportunities.
Money certainly is speech in the present media regime, and if the only way to stop doing that is to make opportunities for the speech available without the money.
Speaking less metaphorically, one can be converted into the other. I think that's what
exactly.
you're saying.
I like to say that I think it patronizes voters to think that their votes are being bought. I think it patronizes them to think that 30-second silly ads
some of them deserve to be patronized.
Maybe some of them do, but after the recent fiasco in Wisconsin with the failed recall of Scott Walker and all that, the first thing you heard from the labor leaders and the left and everything was, well, they outspent us 7-1. I never quite got to the bottom what the truth was about that. I think there was different ways of looking at that, but I don't think it was necessarily money, outside money, Koch brothers money, or any kind of money that bought Scott Walker. And I think a lot of people like Doug Henwood and so forth pointed out what the more fundamental issues were involved and who the Democrats nominated for this recall, how they conducted their campaign, how Obama didn't get involved in the campaign, and so on and so forth, that really exposed a lot about the weakness of liberal politics or of Democratic Party politics that wasn't being held, they weren't being held accountable for, because they could always talk about, well, poor us, they have all that money, and what do we have? Well, it showed, that one reference afterwards said, well, 90% of the people, this election was in June, 90% of the people had made their minds up by May 1st who they were going to vote for. Of course, the campaign ads, just like the national election focuses on a few states and on a few voters in a few states, the campaign ads supposedly focus on those decided or middle of the road or moderate voters or whatever you want to call them. But I think it still patronizes them to say that it's the ads and the money that really determines the outcome.
I see. So your claim is that the amount spent on advertising and the campaigns has little or no relationship to the results?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see more data on this, but I don't.
It's been done again and again. There'll be a regression analysis showing you that each additional dollar or $1,000 in campaign spending will produce X number of votes.
That's nonsense. Now, come on. Look, what this shows is not. I mean, I'd be stronger than David. This is a the progressives' contempt for the electorate, saying, "Well, yeah, we lost in Wisconsin, but we lost in Wisconsin because they had all that money to buy television time, and of course, the electorate immediately went along with that." That's not even. What was the term you used, David? You said a certain condescension.
Patronage.
Yes, that's right. I would say it's worse. I say it's contempt for the electorate. The electorate looked at this and they said, okay, here we have a governor saying some peculiar things about unions and so forth, and here we have the unions saying peculiar things about how outside money is corrupting the election and supporting the same Democrats whom we didn't vote for before in this election. What are we going to do? The notion that we voters are simply tools of the marginal dollars spent on advertising is contemptuous, and I think it's false. I think that they got a reading on the Wisconsin electorate that depended on something other than the liberal bromides. I think of the comparison with Tom Frank's book a number of years ago, What's the Matter with Kansas?, where he said, why do these people in Kansas keep voting, this was during the Bush administration, why do these people in Kansas keep voting against their real interests when it's obvious that their interests lie with the Democrats? Well, I think the problem with Frank's book, which had some interesting things to say along the way, was that an awful lot of people who lived in Kansas didn't think their interests lay with the Democrats, and they had good reason for thinking that. I think the same thing happened in Wisconsin.
Okay, Carl, I think you're bluffing, telling us what the people there in Wisconsin thought or believed or whatever.
What they believed in was the alternative candidate turning out to be not someone who was serving their interests at all, but rather the same candidate whom they hadn't elected to that position before. The Democrats preferred to have their hand in the game. It's like Bush and Gore in 2000. They preferred to have their hand in the game, even a losing hand, than not to have their hand in the game at all.
Carl, there's no empirical basis for anything like that.
Pardon?
There's no empirical basis for anything like that. It's all a deduction from some other doctrine that you have. And
the empirical basis is how the people in Wisconsin voted. And your notion the people in Wisconsin voted because outside money corrupted their mind, turned their little minds away from where their real interests lay, you know, that I think there's no reason to believe at all. They chose to vote that way. The best way to find out why they voted that way is to ask them. And if we look at the polls, we found something very different. We don't find anybody saying, well, I voted for the governor because there was a lot of outside money on his side. That's what they said.
They don't say that. They never would say that. That's a completely false issue.
Okay. Why did they? But
the question is, did they? I mean, if I had been living in Wisconsin, I would have voted in favor of recalling Walker. Okay.
Me too.
And the question is, so in assuming that voters are being patronized, I mean, I would also have to say, well, certainly a lot of voters don't understand. There are things that a lot of voters don't understand given the political climate, given the media that informs them, including campaign ads, but a lot more. And so, I mean, I don't idealize people understanding what their interests actually are on the one hand. I don't idealize people having a sophisticated understanding of the way the economic system works and outside money and all that. But I also don't want to idealize or overestimate the idea that the Democrats didn't have a clear alternative, didn't really offer a clear enough alternative to Governor Walker in a way that might perhaps have opened up a few people's eyes.
They had a clear alternative. It was the same alternative they'd offered before. Yeah. I mean, let's be clear. This wasn't a recall election in the sense that the question is, shall the governor remain governor or not? This was an election for governor that reran the election that had been performed before with the same candidates.
Yeah.
Now that's the point. Now, if I'm a Wisconsin voter looking at that, I'm saying, no, wait a minute. You know, I've perhaps learned some more about where Governor Walker is from what I'd heard a few years ago, what I heard at the time of the election. But you know, is this really the case that I want to change my vote? That I understand my interest to lie someplace else from where they lay then? I'm not sure.
But I mean, there was a sort of interesting wrinkle in the way the pro-Walker campaign worked, and is that they asked people not to vote for Walker, but to vote against the idea that he'd done anything illegal to merit being recalled, and to establish a kind of precedent for recalling people that we don't like rather than people who do illegal things. I don't know how many voters really voted in that way. There was some reference after the campaign to the fact that there were some voters who may not have been pro-Walker, but they were against the idea of establishing the precedent of recalling him in this way. Whether that makes voters smarter than I'm saying or dumber than I'm saying, I don't know. But
yeah, other commentators have said that was a bad aspect of it. That was only the third time it's been tried in American history to recall a sitting governor. It would have been better to go the impeachment route, and that should be used a lot more often.
Yeah, and we should start at the top. That's exactly right. I think you could make an argument one of the great failures of American politics in our generation was the failure to impeach Bill Clinton and remove him from office. Had we done that, you know, other things would have followed that would have been worthwhile. But, I'd love to hear you run on the point of Citizens United. Was it rightly decided?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, shucks.
No, not at all. But it, again, had the effect of injecting a whole lot of dark money into these campaigns. And it's made anything that might reasonably be called democracy severely hobbled and crippled
Forgive me, I think that's absolute nonsense.
Okay.
Rightly decided. Citizens United was a decision in favor of the First Amendment. Any way you're going to limit free speech, the overwhelming burden of proof is on the limitation of free speech. In fact, the Bill of Rights says that Congress can't do that. That you shall make no law.
Well,
and it seems
this
to me that
presupposes a prior judgment, which seems to be plainly false, that money is speech.
well, I tried to explain earlier, it is precisely that in our present media regime. Money is speech in the sense that that's where I buy my ads if I'm running for office.
Is there a whole different issue involved when they talk about corporations being people? I mean, are we falling when we decide that we want that money is speech? Are we also deciding that corporations, in fact, are people in that case? I mean, I would think that it's two different things.
Yeah, I
think that we can still talk about doing stuff legally to make
Right.
corporations not have the rights of people.
Exactly. And I think I think it might be reasonable to say, okay, corporations are combinations chartered by the state and acting in accord with rules established by the state. Those rules could include something about how they spend their money. Money being speech, how they spend their money, rather than saying what the court did say was that money being speech, they can spend their money for speech. So I agree with you as far as that goes, David. What I don't agree with is the notion that the court or the Congress has the right to tell a labor union or a business corporation or any other association that has incorporated under the laws of the state what it can and can't say. And that's what this decision does. So.
Well, we just better get Obama re-elected this year, because he might be able to pick some more Supreme Court justices.
Good. Oh
Yeah,
well, that's
I'm
proper
being,
place
I'm
to
being
end.
facetious.
Being provocative.
News from Neptune this has been the Bottom's Dream edition, and nothing could be more appropriate. No line of contemporary politics could be more appropriate to end on than that. In the Midsummer Night's Dream, Bottom says, and I quote, "I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Methought I was, there is no man can tell what. Methought I was, and methought I had, but man is a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom, and I will sing it in the latter end of a play before the Duke, and it will be called Citizens United." If our
I
program
can top that. I'm going to start the rumor that we're all naked from the waist down here. Bottom Street. Well, anyway.
If our program interested you, you may want to see these other programs that here on Urbana Public Television, weekdays, every weekday, Monday through Friday, Democracy Now! At 7 a.m., The Big Picture at 8 a.m., The David Pakman Show at noon. Other programs in the schedule that have connections with ours you can find by looking at that schedule or by looking at the schedule that UPTV posts between programs. This has been News from Neptune for June 22nd and the 25th week of 2012. Our program is named for Noam Chomsky. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight on News from Neptune have been David Green and Ron Szoke. This and other editions of this program can be seen on the website newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook. I'm happy to receive your comments. My thanks to Caleb, our director, and congratulations on his upcoming engagement. Inshallah, we'll be back with you next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come and yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.